Well, a very good evening, afternoon, morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very, very warm welcome to this evening's BA Community webinar. I'm really pleased to say we're joined this evening by Neil Mullarkey, who's going to be presenting a really interesting webinar talking about some of the softer interpersonal skills that I know as business analysts we often rely on. In fact, I think that as BAs, often the softer skills are really what delineate a really, really good BA. So before we get started, just a little bit about Neil. Neil Mullarkey is a unique communication expert. I first saw Neil present at a BA conference Europe a few years back, and it was absolutely fantastic. He brought the art of improv into business and business analysis. You may have seen him, in fact, in comedies like Whose Line Is It Anyway? I'm Sorry, I Haven't a Clue, QI, and in fact, he was in 2 Austin Powers movies. More recently, he has written a book, 7 Steps to Improve Your People Skills. That was published just a few months ago in October 2017, and I know he'll be drawing on that book in our presentation this evening. So with a presentation entitled Soft Skills, Hard Business, Neil, over to you.
Well, hello. I had all sorts of thoughts, people saying soft skills, we don't like the sound of it. If you're in the world of training, it sounds like it's demeaning these quite important communication, interpersonal skills. Other people who aren't in my world of training and leadership development saying, oh no, soft skills. Somebody said to me once, you're not going to lecture me, are you? It feels like some people are admonished because they lack soft skills. Others think they may not be important. Others may realize that without those so-called soft skills, you won't be able to communicate and work with people who don't understand your so-called hard skills. So the first slide is interesting. Adrian's in charge of tech, so I've asked him to get onto this. So I hope everyone can see that. I think this was a question in 2015 to HR and strategy officers from around the world for the World Economic Forum. What will you need to thrive in 2020? And already people have been criticizing this list because it's already out of date in the world of robotics, artificial intelligence, when you can have driverless cars, when you can have all sorts of computer things that do stuff we used to do ourselves. But just look at that list, complex problem solving. Now, you could do that on your own. There may be no need to speak to or involve other people. Critical thinking, yeah, maybe. But complex problem solving, you might need help from somebody else. Critical thinking, you might need to share your thoughts or have a discussion with somebody. Creativity, certainly, you can use other people. Other people, often the way that anything happens in the world, in business and organizations, is you've got to bring other people on board. And so number 4, people management. This is where things can go wrong. In fact, I was talking to somebody today who used to be in the army, and he can't quite believe that in the civilian world, leadership is not given the prominence that it should do. Certainly in the military, there's always that sense of morale. There's always that sense of checking on how are the people doing, how's everyone, even those in the front line, if you were, the more junior people, the middle ranks, how are they getting on, how are they seeing it? Number 5, coordinating with others. Number 6, emotional intelligence. This is the idea, and not everyone knows what I'm talking about here. And people talk about IQ, and we understand that's about how good you are at, say, rational analysis. But emotional intelligence is the idea that I know how I'm feeling, I know how the other person's feeling, or I'm sensing the impact we're having on one another. And if somebody's feeling a bit upset, you might approach them differently, perhaps, than you would if they were giggling, or if it's a profound issue that compared with asking, do you want a cup of coffee? Number 7, judgment and decision making. Yeah, you decide, and often those priorities are which person, which people, which group, which team. So strategy could be just to do with so-called hard numbers and spreadsheets, but often it's a personal thing. And when you Google soft skills, for example, or any other search engine, you'll find that things like delegation, prioritization, time management, these are the so-called soft skills. But in the end, we call the book 7 Steps to Improve Your People Skills, because we thought it's actually dealing with people, and even if that person is yourself. Okay. Now, if they'd only not had a Twitter feed, I wouldn't have been cross. It's interesting how we expect these days certain things to be quicker, to react to us, which in the old days we wouldn't. But service orientation, surely that the way we deal with our customers who may be happy or not so happy, how do we deal with our customers? Because the right kind of well-placed apology works. Whereas I got some emails, they were replying to my emails, another group from this organization, but instead of saying sorry, they just kept telling me why I wouldn't get a refund. And they were at fault, and they could have just said, yes, something happened, it won't happen again, and we did rectify it within half an hour, but when there are children involved, having a party, half an hour is a long time. 9, negotiation. Now, surely this is all about people skills. Yes, there are hard numbers. Yes, you've got your red lines perhaps, but it's all about seeing what the other person wants to give up or what you want to give up, and what they can win, you can win, and ideally you both feel like you've won, and that it's a relationship that can move forward and nobody feels as if they're being backed into a corner. Number 10, cognitive flexibility. Well, certainly this is a personal situation one can have, which is what I talk about in the first chapter in a minute, about can you learn, can you feel you can be agile, can you change your mind, can you have a new way of looking at things, but also can you see it from the other person's point of view, whether it's client, customer, colleague, boss, team member. So this slide is the most complex slide of the several I will show you. And it says, which of these really isn't a people skill? And I'm going to say, I think 9 of them involve some level of people interaction, of understanding how you feel. Did you hear that noise, by the way? It must have received an email. How you feel and how what you're feeling makes other people feel. And I think even with number 1, complex problem solving. And I know sometimes you just need to go away and sit on your own in a quiet room, away from interruptions, and think about it. Or actually, what you need to do sometimes is go for a walk or get out in the fresh air. Because sometimes the answer comes to you when you're least expecting it or when you're not thinking about it. But nevertheless, solving problems often involves collaborating with others. Certainly, communicating the answer or the solution to the problem requires buy-in from other people. And I'm sure we've all been told by somebody, this is the answer, do it, get on with it. And that may be helpful in certain circumstances. There may be times when you want to have it explained, or you want to have someone show you how to do it. So my thesis is that 9.5 of these 10 could be people skills. So my next slide, Adrian, is the first chapter of the book. And that's an interesting slide, isn't it? People are looking at the feet and thinking, how do I walk like that? That's quite interesting. How do I make sense of that? But the first one, when I was asked to do a speech for the London Business Forum some years ago on personal impact, I knew that from my world of improv, I had to have the word listen in there. And that's one of the chapter titles, because in my work, I've been teaching people the skills of improv and how to get on better with people, how to communicate, how to be more creative collectively, listening to the other person, listening to the other people, listening to your customers, listening to your suppliers is incredibly helpful. So I came up with a few others. One was the importance of eye contact, the importance of humor. And for the first one, I thought that people often notice, I spend a day with them doing a workshop, talking about improv, talking about how do we deal with complexity and ambiguity and uncertainty and volatility, which is the new buzzword, which is called VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. The world is a VUCA world. That actually came from the US Army. And I'm talking about quantum physics sometimes, is that can we hold this and the opposite in the same breath, like Schrodinger's cat. And I'm talking about how people have different views of the world and we have our own mental paradigms. But all they want to know quite often, the participants, is how did you learn our names? So I thought, learn, okay, we'll call that. Can I learn people's names? Because people love it when you do know their name. And the conference speech I gave when I first met Adrian was to about 500 people, and I tried really hard to learn people's names. Unlike when I do a workshop, when I've got a list of everyone's name attending, I can learn them in advance, or at least get acquainted. Conference speeches are hard because you don't have a list and you don't get to meet people one by one as they come through the door. But that's my main tip, is try and get a list of names of people in advance, try and learn them one at a time. Because I'm sure you've been in meetings, networking events where you've been confronted with 4 or 5 people and you can't get that many. So when I'm running a workshop, is I write down everyone's name on a flip chart, and then as they come in, I say, what's your name? John. What's your name? Anne. Okay, then I go and tick John, I go and tick Anne on my flip chart, and I've got a picture of the person, I've got a picture of the letters in their name, and I've got the sound of their name in my head. So I've got 3 different touch points, if you like. That's how I learn people's names. And also, the broader point is that I want to learn about people, and I broaden this out later on in my book, which is, can you see every situation, every conversation, every meeting, every project, every encounter, whether long or short, business, not business, technical, not technical, as a possibility to learn? And I cite the work of Carol Dweck, which is how you might expect. It's like deck, but with a W, as in dweeb or Dweck, but Dweck, Carol Dweck. And she talks about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. That people sometimes, fixed mindset means I can't learn anything, I'm either clever or not clever. And so some children were stuck with a problem that Carol Dweck knew was too difficult for them. And some just said, oh no, I give up. I thought I was clever, but I'm not. That's the fixed mindset. The growth mindset says, oh, it's a challenge. What can I learn? I may not get the answer, but what can I learn from this? So that's my first thought. And I found that it kind of underpinned the rest of the book. So we'll go to the next one, which, the next slide, please, Adrian. So look, this is a very simple one, as I mentioned earlier. Eye contact, certainly in our society, is really important. We trust people who look at us, who give us enough eye contact. And I've seen various percentages for how long should we hold eye contact. 60%, 95%, depends upon the situation, the person, etc. But we do know we find it off-putting when somebody doesn't give us enough eye contact. They're looking away, they're looking down, or they're looking at our ear, not our eyes. I know that in some cultures, too much eye contact may seem insolent, but certainly in where I am, Western Europe, North America, we want people to look at us because then we know they're giving us some attention, some respect, and probably will listen to us, all the better. And this exemplifies my point, is that we can learn. And I did this once with somebody who was fairly shy, and she was in a back office function, and she said, every month I have to go and present to the chief executive. I can't dare to look at him. I said, yes, you can. Let's just try it now. 2 colleagues sat there. There'll be the other members of the executive team. I'll be the chief executive. Just concentrate and look at me just a little bit more, every now and again. And after a while, she started sitting up. Her voice had more power. She said, oh, this is easier than I thought. So that's why learn is step 1, is try and learn to increase your adaptability, to be better at people skills, because whatever your job is in business analytics or whatever, nobody ever said, oh, I better not be too good with people because then they won't take me seriously. I'm sure many people have said, I wish people did take me more seriously, but I'm no good at these political skills. I'm no good with people. Everybody can learn to be better. And look is something you can practice. There's a very good book called Eye Contact by Daniel Ellsberg. And he says, why not just practice? Walking down the street, looking at people, and trying to get the color of their eyes, blue, brown, just long enough. So it's probably a bit longer than you might look at a stranger. Then look away, just as a practice. I always like it when receptionists look at me. I dislike it when they're looking down at their pad of paper, or worse, when they're on the phone on what's clearly a personal call. But try that in the street. It's something, again, a little exemplar of how we could learn to be a bit more confident by doing something quite straightforward, like increasing eye contact. But of course, there's a caveat, which is be careful how you finish the eye contact. Because if you look down quickly or kind of hold it a bit too long and look away slowly, the other person might take it in an inappropriate way. So he says, look to the side just gently, not too slowly, not too quickly. Look to the side as you break eye contact. Isn't it great? Because I know when you come into a room of strangers or people you know, immediately your eyes are drawn to the person who's looking at you, and the person is smiling. We'll come to smiling in a minute. Okay, I'm conscious that I want to get as much of this out of the way so we can have some questions. Adrian is fielding any possible questions as we speak now. So what are you thinking out there? Does this make sense? I would imagine people out there thinking already, well, I want to listen to this fellow, so you're fairly friendly, not too hostile. But it'd be interesting to hear any examples of people who have tried some of this stuff and the advantages they've found in the way that using people skills can enhance their communication and their confidence. Step 3, Adrian is pressing the button. Listen. As I said, look at those feet, aren't they fun? I think that we ought to have a little dance, which is based upon all of these movements of the shoes. These wonderful graphic designers, a company called Howdy, did the design for the book. Anyway, it's listen. This is vital. I could do a whole book on listen. Perhaps I will one day. But this is the basis of improv theatre, which is how I entered the world of leadership development 18 years ago. And Adrian was a whippersnapper. And in improv, and I don't know if anybody has ever seen an improv show, you might have seen the TV show called Whose Line Is It Anyway? You might have seen people being funny. But actually, improv started, and I use the word improv because it shows that it's actually a form of theatre and indeed music and art that allows for moments of spontaneity. But there is a code, I suppose, there's an ethos, there's a mindset, a structure, dare I say. But this actually started, improv started in the 1920s with a social worker in Chicago in the United States. She was working with children, deprived inner city children, some of whom didn't speak English as their first language. And she wanted them to be able to speak up in class, to be more confident. And so she created some exercises that gave them that confidence. And her son, by the 1950s, her name was Viola Spolin, and her son created what has become known as Second City Theatre Company. And I'd heard of Second City because some of my heroes, like John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, and then the people from Ghostbusters, Bill Murray, and many, many others since. But I'd heard of Second City. But I didn't know it was improv until I met a man called Mike Myers. He was sitting, selling tickets for a show I was in London. He just arrived. And he'd heard of Cambridge Footlights, which is a sketch group I was in. And there he was, saying, tell me more about your comedy. And I said, Second City, how exciting. And I'd never seen an improv show. I couldn't believe people would make it up. And he said, the main skill in improv is to listen to your fellow player, to treat what he says as an offer. And there's some colleagues of mine, Rob Poynton, who wrote a book about improv, but they're called On Your Feet. But they say an offer is something somebody gives you, you can do something with. And I wonder if in the BA community, how many times have you had an internal or external customer, colleague, say something to you and you think, oh no, that's not what I wanted to hear. We frame it, oh, that's something I can use. They've shown me what they're thinking or feeling. It's a little gift, an insight into how they're perceiving the world. And I can show that I've understood, or at least tried to understand, in the way that I respond. I'll treat what they say as an offer and build on it. And that's where we get the yes and game. Yes and as opposed to yes but. And that's been really my way into so much of the development, creativity, leadership development stuff that I've done over the last many years. And I talk about intentive listening. You're deliberately trying to use what the other person said in the way that you respond. Can you yes and versus yes but? And there was a really wonderful blog, which I mentioned in the book, by a leadership consultancy called Zenga Folkman. Zenga as in arson, not Wenger, Zenga. Zenga Folkman as in folk music. And they interviewed thousands of executives, and they thought, what is listening? And I think we all have a picture of listening, which is, I give you my full attention. I nod, I go, yeah. I don't speak too much, and I seem to be really there with you. And the metaphor might be sponge. But this blog, and from the Harvard Business Review by Zenga Folkman, said, actually, from the interviews, we found you're less of a sponge, you're more of a trampoline. It's an active process. You're not just absorbing, you're sending signals back, you're asking questions, you're reflecting, you're seeing if the person has expressed themselves, maybe trying to help them express it. And you're not listening for facts, you're listening for ideas. I say, what's the story behind this? What are you trying to say to me, my friend, my colleague, my customer, my client? What's really going on here? And turns out we have the capacity to listen to 400 words a minute, but generally we speak at 125 words a minute. So there's a gap of 275 there, the listening gap, we called it. And what are we doing with that? You know, when you're listening to somebody, but not really, you're sort of listening to your own internal dialogue. You're thinking about your shopping. You're thinking about what beautiful eyes they have, or is it going to rain later? Or what a funny font they got in their PowerPoint slide. And real listening, you have to notice that there's a bit of spare capacity there and try and use that to be thinking, what's he trying to say? What's she really trying to express here? Try and use that. So that's why step 4, Adrian, is to try and link what you say to what they've said to you, to show you've listened. It's kind of the yes and versus yes but. But there's lots of evidence to show that we tend to share more with people with whom we do have a link. We feel we link. We try and find commonality. Don't we like somebody who says, well, I've been to the same place on holiday. I like the same films, same food. We've shared something in our education. So we tend to be, in a way, probably it's evolutionary psychology, which is, who are these people? Are they a bit like me? Are they my kith and kin? Will they share their food with me? Perhaps that's where it comes from. But we naturally want to try and find something in common. And if you want to take this one level up, and you may not feel it's right for you, but there is some evidence that you try and link your body language to theirs, link your types of verbal language to theirs. Even, I've read somewhere, if you try and breathe in the same rhythm as them, there's some sense of subconscious rapport going on there. That may feel not terribly comfortable to everyone, but it's at least you're thinking, am I consciously trying to work with what they're giving me? Because I'm sure you've all come across people that you've met for the first time, you don't know particularly well, and you start a conversation, some small talk, and you might say, I've just come back from a skiing holiday, and they say, I don't like skiing. Oh. And why do that? Why create a disconnect? Dale Carnegie, who wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People in the 1930s, the first, if you like, self-help business book, probably that I was aware of, and maybe the first one written. But he said the way to win an argument is to avoid it, because as soon as you tell somebody they're wrong, they'll climb up, or they'll go to their fight or flight mechanism. They'll sort of start wanting to fight you, albeit in our society in a polite way. But why find reasons to disconnect? We could find reasons to link, to share. What have we got in common? And I quote in the book a man called Robin Dreeke, which is like Dr. Eek, Dreeke, but with an E, who wrote a book about influence, and it's called It's Not All About Me. It's not all about me, how to influence somebody. He says, listen is important. Listen to validate rather than to judge. To influence somebody, you need to listen to them, to understand their goals and objectives, because they may have different goals and objectives, different from what you think, but perhaps different from your own. But the more you understand what motivates them, the more you might be able to help them and influence them, if that's what you're hoping to do. So can you link together? That's interesting. Can you link your stories, actually? Because I also teach presentation skills, and there's a little thread running through the book of how to make your presentations better. And all the ones I've given you so far are important, which is look at your audience. Don't look at your slides. Don't look out the window. Don't look at your feet. Listen to your audience. Are they shifting? Are they asking questions? Are they with you? Try and link what you're saying to them. Are they from the world of business analytics? So when I did the IRM conference, organized by IRM, the BA in Europe, when I met Adrian, I tried to link my world to theirs, albeit in my own naive way. And Adrian gave a wonderful presentation where he talked about the Titanic. What can we learn from the Titanic? And there were many instances where the sinking of the Titanic could have been avoided. And he linked that to the world of business analytics. And it was brilliant because it helped me, an outsider, understand what business analytics is. And there may be people out there thinking, well, they don't know what business analytics is. Because I know some people out there who are not from the BA world, and they'll be intrigued by what BA is. So my next step, number 5, is let. Let, very short word. And again, when I started a few years ago with this speech at the London Business Forum, which was about personal impact, creating rapport, and I thought, let the other person speak. And the old saying, which is, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you should do twice as much listening as you do talking. And as an aside, I thought, well, hang on, we've got 10 fingers, so we should do 5 times more typing than listening. But no, I digress. Anyway, the point about let was I thought there were moments when you should let the other person speak. Let him get away with it. Sometimes they might say something like, I've been on a skiing holiday, you hate skiing or have a big problem with skiers, you were once shouted at by somebody on a ski slope and you can't stand the whole idea. But what point is there in pointing out a divergence of experience? So let them speak, let them have their moment. And that's what Robin Dreeke would say, the FBI guy who was head of behavior analysis, the counterintelligence unit. He knows about how people are influenced and how they react under stress. So he says, let the other person speak. Suspend your ego, he says. Let them have an opinion that isn't yours. Why put them right all the time? And of course, in my book, I say there are times when you need to point out if they're wrong, when there's danger involved, safety, whatever. And really, I found a wonderful bit about when you really have to say to somebody, well, I disagree with you. A great way is to respect their argument. So, for example, try and restate their argument almost better than they have. And say what you have in common. What have you learned? What do you agree before you say, I disagree? Because otherwise, again, because of that sense of fight or flight, somebody is told they're wrong, they will stop listening. They can't help feeling a little bit aggressive in a sort of defensive way. So I found other meanings for let yourself off the hook if you do make a mistake, because going back to this notion of learning about improving your people skills, there'll be some mistakes. You'll try something out and it won't go quite as you planned. Hopefully nobody's going to punch you, but maybe you've had a chance to think about, okay, today I won't say but, or today I'll try and listen more than I speak, or today I'll see if I can get a bit more eye contact. Today I will speak less in the meeting and I'll let others speak. And I also find that there are some of us who try and finish off the other person's sentence. Let them finish their own sentence. Because often there's an interesting bit. If you leave a pause and somebody said something, leave a pause, and then they'll say something even more interesting or more revealing, or actually what they think deep down. Certainly doctors say that. If you let the patient speak, they might give away what it is that's actually worrying rather than the thing you came with in the first place. Right. I'm getting there. Step 6, lighten. Now, because I come from the world of comedy, so I was a full-time comedian for a long time now. I still do comedy. I still perform with the Comedy Store Players every Wednesday and Sunday in London, and that's virtually the only showbiz stuff I do, but I love it because I'm working with the team. I laugh and the audience laughs and we make things up. That's what's so joyous about improv. It's spontaneous, fallible, wonderful, collaborative. But Lighten is about how do we bring laughter to work? How do we bring a sense of humor to our team, to our leadership style? Now, some people think, oh, right, jokes. You're making jokes at somebody else's expense. I don't call that humor. I don't call that lightening. So I'm here talking about lightening the mood, which is we've got a tricky problem. Find something that makes you laugh about it. And it's interesting that if you have a sense of humor, it shows you have a different perspective on things. Leaders who can say, well, from another point of view, it looks like this. Or, you know what, it looks intractable now, but in 2 weeks it may not. Or I think it's interesting when leaders will admit flaws or when they've made a mistake or a story about how they made a bit of a mess of things and they've still recovered. They recovered, the boss forgave them or whatever, or they learned from it. And that I think encourages people to say, okay, even if I've made a mistake, I can become more because of it. The mistake can be a position of learning, but I can certainly recover from it. So Lighten is about bringing humor, and bringing humor actually enhances creativity. There's so much evidence to show that creative environments are ones where there is laughter. It's general laughter. It's not one group of people laughing at another group. And I think for some people, humor looks a bit like a male thing. There's a bunch of men in a corner laughing and being horrid. I can speak as a man. I've seen them on the train and on tubes. These curious men, young men, hanging around, just going, they're not saying anything of any interest, really, but they're just recounting some jokes or some in-jokes about Phil and his hair and Dave and his Ferrari or whatever. It's just that sort of in-group cohesion. But what I'm talking about is, and there is a phrase, and I put a lot about humor in this chapter, and my very clever editor said, no, that's just going too deep. It's only of interest to other comedians. But it was about affiliative humor, where humor affiliates us. It makes us feel together. And the best kind of humor is the one where we share our vulnerability, where we realize we're all the same, we're all vulnerable, we're all flawed. And that's why I like people, comedians or sitcoms or films that show actually, yes, I'm a bit like that. Or, oh, wow, I never thought of that, but it's true. Yeah, I do that. So Peter Kay with Dad running, who then pretends he isn't running because it looks somehow less high status than he would want. And also there is another aspect of Lighten. You can see I've had my cake and eat it with this book. I've managed to get 2 or 3 meanings of the same word, but Lighten. And I'm wondering if many people listening to this, certainly in the BA community, spend a lot of time sitting down. So lighten your posture. They say that sitting is the new smoking, and the best posture is the one you don't hold for too long. Certainly you're more creative. You get out, go for a walk, get some fresh air, whatever. So lighten your posture, as if, you can even think of it now, as if there's a string on the top of your head at the back, sort of lifting you up like a marionette or something. And I quote from a brilliant book called Gravitas, which is by Caroline Goyder, Goider, Caroline Goyder. And she wrote her book about gravitas, which is not about being heavy and brave. It's about how do you deport yourself? How do you get people to listen to you? How are you assertive in the right way? And she just noticed that posture is both healthy and also better for getting your message across. If you're slouching, it's not good for you. If you're sitting up, you feel more confident in your own words, and it's better for your general health. So just a warning to people, if you're sitting down for too long, it's not great. 15 minutes at a time is probably enough. Get up, get moving. And I think also that's good for anybody in an organization to just go for a walk, bump into people, have those informal, impromptu chats. That sometimes means you get a creative breakthrough, or you talk to somebody where you get to know them. And in a year's time, you'll have that level of trust that a really useful chat will solve a problem. Okay, and there, I'm going to take my advice, hopefully, with the next slide, which is called Leave Well. Leave Well. This was based on my observation, because I work with presentation classes quite a lot, and often people finish a presentation really badly. They go, well, anyway, thanks very much, goodbye. Or, well, this is no more questions, I'll go. Thank you. And they haven't really teed it up. They haven't helped us as the audience to know this is the end. They haven't given us a final image or word or strapline that helps us remember the whole thing. And then I found there's lots of research that shows that the end can infect the whole thing. I'm sure we've all seen a film where the end sort of lets down the whole film. And we will remember the end, and it can color our view of the rest of it. So how we say goodbye to somebody at a networking event or a conversation. And I'm sure people have been at networking events where you think, do I really have to do this? But a piece of good advice is don't try and meet 100 people, meet 3 people. Meet a few people, but meet them and meet them properly, get to know them. But then what do you do when you finish? You both want to go, you both finished where you need to get to. I suppose you've understood their world. And you both say, oh, I must go to the toilet, or I must get another drink. No, why not just say, I've enjoyed meeting you, I'll email you tomorrow, I'd like to introduce you to that person over there. She's got a great story. Or, you know what, I love your example about chicken. And you go and introduce them to somebody else, and then you haven't left them high and dry, and you've given them a good big up to somebody else. So how we leave an encounter, both if it's a formal presentation, if it's a pitch, so what are the last words? How do you shake hands at the end? And also one, which is, how do you leave a job? When you finish the job, do you leave it and burn your boats? Because in this interconnected world, you may come across your customers, your colleagues, again, as a speaker, as a client, as a colleague, as a next door neighbor, who knows. So don't leave with a bad taste in your mouth. I think that's really important. And the final thing I say in the book is, don't leave your day in a bad way. There's lots of research that shows simple acknowledging gratitude to other people is self-fulfilling in a way. The more we say thank you to people or are grateful for our situation, the more we'll notice the good things in life. They've found this in many ways. Gratitude is good for your health. Say thank you for your friends. Say thank you to people who've helped you. And you suddenly start to begin to notice the good things that they've done, the positives in your life. So that's the last one. Leave your day well. At the end of the day, think of 3 good things that happened to you, 3 things for which you're thankful. And it could be just, that was a really tasty carrot I had for my lunch. But I hope I have left you time, dear listener, to ask a few questions. Adrian, you could be sitting there and in your inbox, there are no questions whatsoever. Oh, I see there's a Q&A box. So have a look at that.
There are definitely questions coming in, Neil, both in the Q&A box and also in the chat. So just as a reminder to everyone on the line, if you do have questions, do type them in either the Q&A or indeed the chat window. Well, in fact, we have one person was so keen they pre-submitted their question by email, Neil. So I feel it's only fair I should address that one first. Okay. And the question is about improv, actually. And the question is that the improv doesn't work off a plan or a script, but by quick minds using their resources to achieve a goal. Many companies prefer a plan or step-by-step methodology rather than working towards a vision that engages and inspires the workforce. Thomas Edison said, there are no rules here, we're trying to accomplish something. It worked for him. What are your thoughts on the value of an improv, of improv in organizations, but also in leading and managing organizations? I know you've touched on that a little bit, Neil, but perhaps if you could touch on that a little bit more.
Well, that's interesting because I do an improv show every Sunday and Wednesday, and there is a structure in terms of, we know it starts at 7:30 on a Sunday, 8 o'clock on a Wednesday, it finishes 2 hours later. We know the games we're going to play. We know the people involved. There are 6 of us. We're pre-assigned who they are. The Comedy Store takes care of selling tickets, the lights, the sound. And so there's enough structure. My friends at Ashridge Consulting, which was part of Ashridge Hult Business School, they used to talk about sufficient structure, i.e. minimal structure, maximum autonomy. Now, some people want to have a sort of Wild West view. Some people want to very things really organized. And I think the sweet spot is somewhere in between. So we have prepared to improvise. And that's why I do for example, I can see the advantages of the agile approach. And in the question you said there, there's almost a dynamic there between how much do you structure, and an organization needs to know what are you going to do by when, and how much do you say, well, we don't know, because creativity isn't something you can put in a box. So I say respect boundaries, which could be budget and timelines. So we in the Comedy Store, we finish on time, the Comedy Store players, and theatre, certainly, you're always ready for first night, you're on budget, you haven't spent too much. So I saw John Cleese speak about this once, and he said the most creative environments are the ones which are small groups for a finite period of time with a specific budget, which is exactly how we do theatre. You rehearse 3 weeks, tour for 8 weeks, that's it. And you know you've got to get on with it, and that's it. And you know you won't have to see each other ever again or not. So try and think of it as project-based, I would say. So there's kind of a structure, but there's enough room within that. But also as a leader, you've kind of got to make people feel comfortable. Each individual, some want to be less managed and some want to be more managed. And encourage each of those to be aware of others' style is my approach, really. So that's why I talk about improv. It's not, improvisation is a word that means kind of using less than perfect ingredients to make a recipe. Improv is a structured approach to say, what do we have? How do I listen to you? How do you and I create something together? Which means you and I are both contributing. And I often think it's less thinking outside the box as looking at the box more carefully, what's already there. And so a lot of creativity to people is, oh, get rid of everything we've already done. No, a better way is something they call solutions focus, another thing called appreciative inquiry, both of which are, what are we already doing that's good? Mm-hmm. Let's do a bit more of that. And I often find when you ask people, what's the best moment in your job? And they say, well, it was that day we went off site and we did a charity thing. And we all mucked in, and hierarchy wasn't that important. And we knew it had a purpose. And we knew it wouldn't go on forever. And we committed to it. All the time we organized that off-site. We all had to work quite hard. We had some setbacks, but we managed to get through because we had a clear end in mind. On the other hand, probably with BA, do you have an end in mind? I don't know. So there we are. My answer is a bit woolly, which is a bit of both. So improv is a bit of structure and a bit of spontaneity, if you like.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Neil. And actually, as you were explaining that, another thing was springing to my mind alongside that, which is when you spoke earlier about vulnerability and almost the, almost things will never go to plan, but you have the opportunity to take to take offers that are accepted. So actually perhaps there's an element of sort of pivoting along the way and having that structure, but going with the flow on a project as well.
Well, Eisenhower, a military man, said there's a difference between the plan and planning. Your plan's dead as soon as you hit the enemy, but it doesn't mean you don't plan ahead of time. So planning is ongoing, and a plan is a piece of paper or something that's based on one snapshot of what may happen at one stage. So you're always thinking what could happen next, but with the sense that there'll be unexpected things happening. So shorter time line. There's a man called Don Sull, like Hull, but with an S. He wrote a book called The Upside of Turbulence, which talked about strategy. And you can't strategize 3 years hence now. You can't know what will happen in 3 years. So shorter horizons. And also that's why I like Agile, because you're sort of strategizing and doing at the same time. You're testing in beta, you're trying things out, you're piloting. I think they call it design thinking or rapid prototyping, which is try stuff out before it's quite ready, and then you kind of know if it works or not, rather than trying to get it pristine and perfect, by which time the moment may have passed.
Absolutely, and that resonates a lot, and I'm sure it will resonate with many people tuned in as well. And I was speaking to someone else recently who I thought came up with a really interesting observation that strategy isn't the document. I think sometimes in business there's this focus, particularly in large organizations, of getting strategy documents, but actually it's the execution of that. It's the it's the making it living and breathing that really really counts. So okay, so we have some other questions. So next question is comes back to, I think, your second point, which was look.
Yes.
Is someone's in an IT environment, I think, and they say some of their stakeholders can find eye contact very hard. So their stakeholders actually actively avoid eye contact.
Yes.
So how can you help someone feel comfortable when they're perhaps avoiding eye contact with you? How would that be? How could we get around that?
Well, I think you just got to say it's not the way they play the game, but I'm going to still look at them. Because then I don't think too much eye contact is too challenging. If it's too close to your face and you're looking at them for 10 seconds uninterrupted, that's a bit too much. But I think looking at somebody just shows you're showing interest in them. So I can see the questions from Jess. I don't think you should sort of fight fire with fire. I.e., if they're not looking at me, I won't look at them, because you don't. When you're looking at people, you're getting a lot of information back from them, and I do find that people do warm into it a bit. Giving them good eye contact does bear fruit in the end. But if they aren't looking at you that much, just don't get too fazed by it. I would say send them along to one of my workshops, and we'll work with them. Because they may say, well, I can't think why if I'm looking at somebody. And I know you need to look away to think of an idea. But it's very hard for us not to feel, if this person isn't looking at us, are they interested or are they hiding something? They may not be. But just a sense that if I can give eye contact, I may get good eye contact back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fantastic. So another question that's come through the chat window rather than the Q&A, so I don't think you'll be able to see this one,
Okay.
is around virtual environments. So a lot of us BAs are probably working with stakeholders who are in different locations, probably potentially even different continents or countries.
Yeah.
And it's quite, I'll paraphrase because it's quite a lengthy question, but it's really around how building rapport in a virtual environment, and is harder, but do you have any tips for it?
Well, somebody said to me a few years ago, if I can create some sort of training module to make teleconferences and video conferences go better, then I'd be a billionaire. Because so many of them are there, and they're so fraught by communication breakdowns, whether it's technical or just people not tuning in properly. So I would say a few things on this, which is try and be fully in the moment in those conferences, in those virtual environments. So I would say get yourself a really good headset to block out other noise, stimulus, etc. Some people don't like video. They don't like to be seen, but it does mean you might concentrate more. It does mean you'll get a bit of the non-verbal information. You might get a bit of a smile and a giggle that you might not get in an audio-only format. So I'd say commit to making it work and make it shorter if possible. Don't have 40 people on a teleconference. I can't see the point of that, but I know people do that. If it's a transmission, I suppose if it's the chief executive giving her weekly thoughts, then maybe that's okay. But if it's genuinely interactive, then 39 people will be bored at any stage. I would say that I'd look at it from another point of view, and you'll tell me the budgets aren't there for this, but I used to think that if you are in a virtual team, you need to see each other just to get the smell and the look of the real person, meet up. And I'd say, once a year, once every 18 months. And then somebody I met who coaches leaders working across global barriers, he said, no, I insist they get together 2 or 3 times a year. Now that could be expensive, but the investment of getting people actually to eyeball one another, to chat, to get all the stuff I'm talking about, which is often when you're in the same room, I think it's a worthwhile investment, because then when you do become virtual and you're communicating by email or some form of text or audio or video, which is necessarily much less informative, then you've got that investment's worthwhile. I trust you because I had a meal. I trust you because I shared something with you. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. I think, it's interesting because I think I know a number of people I've worked with, and in fact I've found similar really, that even if it's just one kickoff, I find even if I can meet someone once, the virtual working after that is easier, and budgets are always stretched, but it's well worth the investment where possible. Someone I used to know had a phrase that they recommended using the highest fidelity of communication available. So if you can do face-to-face, that's better.
Yes.
If you can't do face-to-face, then do video. If you can't do video, then do web and audio. If you can't do web and audio, then do audio, and so on. And I've always thought that's a really interesting sort of pyramid of communication.
Yeah. Yes.
Fantastic. Another quick question from the chat is around laughter and creativity and humour, and it's, if we're working in a stuffy environment, how do we get people to suspend disbelief that humour can be? I'm guessing, I'm extrapolating that they're suspending disbelief that humour is acceptable in a work environment.
Well, suspending disbelief is the phrase you use when you watch a piece of theatre and the actors aren't really the characters in the room. But you sort of go with it. I would say, okay, it's stuffy. So find moments that are appropriate for lightening the mood. And in the old days, that would often be down the pub on a Friday. But I think nowadays, not everyone feels comfortable in the pub. Not everyone can stay late. And so find ways of moments of informality, even in meetings. And they could be not in the sanctioned environment of a meeting. It could be in the coffee bar over the road. And some people are fearful of humour because, for example, somebody on the text here said, "What about sarcasm?" Because the danger could be it feels like it's not taking it seriously, or it's poised, it's aimed at somebody else. But okay, it's stuffy, fair enough. But there's always laughter lurking somewhere. People often say to me, "Oh, what about somebody with no sense of humour?" I've never met somebody who doesn't have a sense of humour. You just have to dig, gently find out what it is that makes them smile. And quite often, it doesn't have to be rip-roaring gags. As you can tell, I'm not a rip-roaring gag kind of person. Often, all I do is gently say something that somebody said to me in a new environment. They say they like golf or something, and then half an hour later, say, we're stuck in the bunker here, aren't we? Or something like that. You just use something that they gave you. In improv, we call it Reincorporation, which is referring back to what somebody said before, but in the new conversation. You mentioned, I think they shared, we call that reincorporation. You reincorporate, bring back into the body of a scene something from before. So it doesn't have to be, hey, let's all have funny red noses and dress up for Comic Relief Day, Red Nose Day, because that makes people feel uneasy perhaps, but just gentle moments of smile. I don't think you want to be coming in with big comedy moments. But if the environment is stuffy, I don't think it's going to help everybody. There are so many environments where just a bit of humor will lubricate the creativity and the rapport.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking on my feet here, Neil, but I'm wondering how much of that might relate to consciously showing some vulnerability. So almost rather than, if it's a presentation, rather than trying to make it absolutely pixel perfect, perhaps almost showing some vulnerability and creating a space where there's a conversation and things aren't perfect. Do you think that's an angle as well, potentially?
I think that's right. I know a lot. You ask people your best presentation experience, they often say not when it went really well, but when something went wrong and they recovered.
Yes.
The memory stick didn't work, or the lights went out. We couldn't get in the right room, so we had to do it on the pavement. Those moments where you kind of recovered and it was human and fallible and vulnerable. Now, I don't know how you build in too much vulnerability into a presentation. I would say build in some interaction.
Yes.
Build in a bit of, what do you think about this? Or has anyone ever done this? Or what do you think is this? You always try and tell people in presentations, don't try and do jokes. But if there's a story where you're the sort of butt of the joke and you show your own fallibility, I think it works well. So Jess, for example, in text said, what about sarcasm? I think we all warm to somebody who said, well, I did a silly thing, didn't I? And it's kind of a little self-deprecating. It's not self-destructive. but it's gently pointing out one's own fallibility.
Yes.
I think that's the right sort of humour.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so we've probably got time for just one more question. So our final question is from Liz, who asks, when we try out these techniques, is it best to work through them in order, or do some have greater impact than others?
Good question. I was just thinking about the answer to that. And I've numbered them 1 to 7. And I did think about that order, and learn underpins the others. But if I had to pick one, I'd say listen. The ability to listen is something we can learn. It's a cognitive skill. It's something that requires you to stop and have a different way of being with other people. And so that's why I would say that's the most important. But equally, they're not in order. I tick off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Try and 6, 7. Try and do them in cahoots with one another. So obviously, leave well is at the end, but keep listening, keep linking, and you find it easier to listen if you're looking. You find it easier to listen if you're thinking, I can learn something from this person. You find it easier to lighten the mood if you really listen to them, and then you can use something they've said just in a tangential way later on. So don't work them in order, Liz Calder. I would say keep in mind all of them, because they all work in tandem. And you can leave well if you've really listened to somebody. It's great to say, I enjoyed your story about X, or I will look out for that Rick Astley video you mentioned, or we better find that recipe for paella that you mentioned, or something like that. So you kind of round it off nicely. Just keep going, really, with them all, because all of them are little tweaks. I've called them simple steps at the end of each chapter. Something you can do today, do now, and it'll have an impact. And it's not that difficult.
Fantastic. Well, just before we close, Neil, in the ethos of leaving well, I guess I'd say, I mean, any final thoughts you want to leave us with, and also, I know a number of people will be asking where they can get the book. I believe it's on Amazon or on the London Business Forum directly, but it'd be good if you could confirm that. And also, if people want to stay in touch with you, how's the best way, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever?
All of the above. The book is available on Amazon. There is a specific site, which is 7steps.neilmullarkey.com. But if you go onto Amazon, 7 Steps to Improve Your People Skills, if by chance you're wise enough to want to buy 10 or more, then yes, the London Business Forum will be able to do that and give you a bulk discount, because that's what I do. Most of my work these days is working with groups, large groups, and often they'll buy 100 copies for the audience or for their 50 top leaders, something like that. That's certainly a very interesting way of propelling my story to people. If you want to be in touch with me, yes, I will say hello on LinkedIn. My Twitter username is Neil Mullarkey. Make sure you spell it. If that's too difficult, then you can also try improv your biz, as in improv your biz. So the whole word, your biz. And neilmullarkey.com is my website. So between all those, if you Google Neil Mullarkey, you'll find something. But I'm quite active on Twitter and on Instagram as well. But as you say, before we came on air, Adrian said that he uses Twitter sometimes as a rest when he's having a writing. And Twitter, I found some wonderful things there, both funny, but also a lot of the articles I cite in books are mentioned in my book, I got from Twitter. So get out there, get on Twitter, but say hello to me. And ultimately, also, if you are in London on a Wednesday or Sunday, come and see the show and see if we use these skills on the stage.
Absolutely, and before we went live, Neil was telling me it's been 32 years the Comedy Store Players have been going, which is just phenomenal. So I've made a note to keep an eye out on next time I'm in London on a Sunday or a Wednesday to rock up and come and see. So fantastic. So all that is left is for us to say a massive thank you to Neil. So thank you, Neil, for being part of this webinar and for presenting your story and talking about the 7 steps. I'm sure everyone listening will have got a huge amount from that and will be wanting to find out more, and will be tweeting and looking at the book and and so on. Also, a massive thank you to everyone that tuned in. As a reminder, really, this webinar series was very much around finding some BA subjects that are perhaps beyond the typical subjects that we would perhaps always talk about in the BA community. So after the webinar, you will get a very short email with a survey. Would be very grateful if you could fill that in with any other topics that you're particularly interested in. We'll try and get those topics if you do suggest them. Also, I'm really pleased to say that we have a webinar coming up with Liz Calder on the 20th of February. The webinar is entitled, "Are you thinking what you think you're thinking?" Which is very difficult to say, hence my long pause there. But it's about cognitive biases. I saw Liz present it at the BA conference this year, and it was fantastic. I'm really pleased that Liz was agreeable to do that. So do tune in for that one as well. So have a great evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you again for attending. And again, thanks again, Neil, for presenting to us.
Adrian, thank you for making this happen. It's been great, and what a wonderful idea. Thank you. You're a wonderful host.
Thank you.